What's that noise?
I don't know, would it be from outside?
No,
It's me.
it's a camera.
Oh. We have quite a lot of questions here.
Interview with Bob Slater at Rushcutters Bay, 16th of May 1995. Hello, Bob. Thanks for talking to me. Where were you born?
I was born at Paddington Hospital in 1933.
Right, and where were your parents living at that time?
We were living in Paddington at the street down beside the town hall. I've just forgotten the name of the street at the moment. That's where we lived then.
Right. And did you have any brothers and sisters?
Well, yes, I have an older half-brother and a younger full sister.
Right. So where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up part of my time here, and the majority of it probably out in Heathcote, Engadine, where my dad had a poultry farm and a truck working on building the Cronulla railway line for some years until after the war.
Right. So when did you move out to Heathcote? At what age?
Would have been after the war.
So you went out to Heathcote when?
In the early 40s.
Early 40s. And from 1933 to then, whereabouts did you live? Was it in Paddington?
Yes, in Paddington. Yeah.
Oh, right. And what sort of a house did you live in there?
Well, it was a terrace house, two-storey brick terrace house on the corner, and didn't have very much of a yard. It was a very small block. I suppose it was only very small. It was around about 500 square metres, but it was an interesting little house. The part I always remember of it is the veranda on the top floor used to go out over the footpath, and you could look over the veranda and look at people walking down past the footpath. Yeah.
How many bedrooms did it have?
It had 4 bedrooms.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, it was a big little house.
Yeah.
Yeah. They weren't very big rooms, huh?
Yeah. And what kind of a kid were you?
Oh, I suppose reasonably active and assertive and interested in things that were on around the place all the time, and was very active in doing things that my dad was doing, and trying to get involved with things as my dad was doing them.
Okay. Just talking about your family, what sort of a family do you come from?
Well, I come from a broken family. My mother divorced my father just after the war was over, and then I went out into the country and took on a project for the government opening up new land in the Riverina area growing rice, and then married a local girl from Griffith whose parents had vineyards there, and after 25, 30 years I came back here, and my wife divorced me too. I lost her too. Pioneering's not a very good job for women.
When you were growing up, what did your dad do? What did he do for a living?
He was a taxi proprietor. He always had his taxi, and when they were building the Cronulla railway line, he had a tip truck working on that all the time, helping build the Cronulla railway line.
So in the Depression, when you were born in 33, he was a cab driver, was he?
Yes. Yeah. Well, before that, before he married my mother, he had 2 estate cars in Queanbeyan, and he lived in Queanbeyan, in Canberra, and my ancestors all come from up in Canberra area and down the south coast at Bega, and he married a girl from Braidwood, and had a boy, a son, with her, and she left and went on her way, and that boy now is H.G. Slater and Sons. He has 3 law firms here in Sydney. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was older than you?
11 years older than I, yeah.
And did he grow up with you?
No, I didn't know him I wasn't very close to him because he was already in college when I was born, and then after he went through university and so forth, he went on, he met a girl and went over with her family. Yeah.
Oh. And so did he live with you when you were growing up, or did he go with his mother?
No, he went with his mother and in college. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't born he was 11 years older than I.
Mm. Mm. Well, how would you describe your mother? What sort of a woman was your mother?
Oh, well, she worked very hard during the war years. I can remember her working very hard on the poultry farm my dad had. In those days, we used to get lots of bushfires coming up around the place, and lots of soldiers around all over the place, and everything was hard to get. Even if you got sick, it was hard to get medicines and things like that. And she used to work very hard at trying to provide enough for the children and the home and to keep things together. And she finally got a job working in a munition factory. She was one of the first lady welders on helping to build aircraft in Australia. Yeah.
Gee, and that would have been very unusual for women to do that.
It was very unusual. She was a great women supporter. She
was a feminist?
Yeah, very much so.
Good.
Yeah.
At home, who controlled the finances when you were a kid, when your dad was the cab driver?
Well, Mum always controlled the finances in the home, but Dad always controlled the finances outside of it.
So what would happen? Would he come home and give her money to run the house?
That's right. He'd give her so much, and then part from what she could earn herself. Yeah.
So would she have been part of his business decisions, or?
Oh, at times, with the poultry farm. Eventually, Dad built some shops in front of the poultry farm, and my mother took on one of the shops as a hairdressing salon and started doing ladies' hairs and things like that. And I can remember that quite clearly. But so she was very, very involved in different parts of Dad's life, but mainly the ones at home.
Were your parents religious?
Not very, no. My grandmother was my grandfather from my dad's side was a Church of England, and my grandmother on my dad's side was Roman Catholic, and my mother was Presbyterian, and and I married into a very religious family in Griffith. They were Roman Catholics. They came from Italian origin.
But when you were a child, you weren't raised were you sent to Sunday school and that kind of thing?
Well, I did go to Sunday school a few times. Yeah, I can remember going to Sunday school a few times. Yeah.
What was that like?
Probably I think it was in the Presbyterian side of things. Well, that was not too bad. Never used to go very often though, not very often. Well, yeah, I used to look forward to going whenever we went, but we never used to go a great deal. Yeah.
What about politics? Were your parents politically active?
No. Only in my dad was a bit interested in local government once. That was about all.
Did he run?
No.
No.
No, he was just interested in it once. He was thinking of it.
Yeah. On what side? Or?
Oh, in local council.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And that wasn't Labor or Liberal or anything?
No.
Well, before we started, you were talking about your dad as a taxi driver and how he used to park down at Central.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
what can you remember of that when you were living in Paddington? What can you remember?
Well, I
about
can remember Dad leaving Paddington early in the morning and having to walk down to Central Railway, because the day before he'd sat in the line all day waiting to get a job. And in those days, the first car on the rank always got the next job, and so you had to come up from the back and keep working your way up, and sometimes it would take him 2 days to get one job, and he'd leave his car there and walk from Central Railway all the way back to Paddington and back again the next morning so that his car wouldn't lose his job, its position. And then sometimes I can remember he'd come home and he'd say, well, I'd sat there for 2 days with that job and all I got was 5 shillings. If someone would get in the cab and say they want to go a couple of blocks up the road, and then he'd take them up there, and then he'd have to come all the way back at the end of the line again.
Yeah.
And other days I can remember him coming home extremely upset when he'd say, oh, for half a day I had Bea Miles in the cab, couldn't get her out. Bea Miles was quite a colourful figure in Sydney in those days, and she used to love riding around in taxi cabs all day. She'd get in the cab and wouldn't get out.
And what did they do to get her out?
Well, they tried all sorts of things, pulling her out, taking her to police stations and all sorts of things, but the easiest way was just leave her in the front seat for a while and just ignore her. And then she never used to tear the place up. But if you tried pulling her out of the cab, she'd try grab hold of things and break things and tear things up and so forth. And so the easiest way was just let her ride around for a few hours and then just get rid of her. She'd go off and get into another taxi then.
And just pick up the customers as usual, but with her in the front?
Just leaving her sitting in the front.
How did the cab drivers feel about her? I mean, what did they...
Well, all cab drivers were horrified with her. If ever they saw her coming, couldn't lock the doors quick enough. Yeah.
Was she dirty and smelly, or...?
Yeah, a little bit at times. Yeah.
Or was she... yeah.
She used to sleep in the doorways and in the buildings in around Sydney and in the parks and so forth. She used to be in a pretty bad way at times. I think there is quite a lot written about Bea Miles. She was quite a character in the Sydney area in those days.
How old would she have been then in the 30s? She wouldn't have been very old, would she?
She wouldn't have been very old, no. But it carried on. She was there for a long time. All through the war or after the war years, she was still there. Yeah.
And aside from the cab drivers, what did other people think of her?
I don't know. She went to university and tried. She sort of studied very, very hard at uni, and then all of a sudden she sort of snapped and just went to pieces. And that's how she ended up being the way she is. She came from a fairly good family, I believe. But everyone knew her fairly well, and everyone that did, especially the taxi people, they couldn't keep far enough away from her. But she'd always collar the taxis whenever she got a chance. Was she
belligerent or was she pleasant? I don't know if people would have been scared of her. Some people are...
Well, she was a little bit rough and scruffy, you know. But I can't remember exactly how she looked, because I never had a lot to do with her myself, except remembering my dad complaining about it all the time. But I think I had seen her a few times, and she was a little bit rough and scuffy and not looked after or groomed too good, but I think a lot of that would come about from sort of not having good living quarters.
Yeah. What sort of discipline was used at home when you were a kid?
Well, Dad was always the boss, but Mum always tried to be. And Mum used to lay the law down in the house and so forth, and Dad would always try and explain why things were so. And if Mum wanted something done such a way and I didn't agree on it, I couldn't argue with Mum because she'd insist on it, but then Dad would probably take me aside and try and explain to me why it had to be.
And what would happen if you were being a bit of a rat bag?
Well,
Were you hit? I mean, because these days...
Well, yes, Dad used to have a razor strap, and it was the dread of us all, this razor strap, and of course that was the last word. If there was no more that could be done, the very last thing was Dad would get the razor strap out. And it was not the one he used to sharpen his razor on, because he had an old one that used to have the end cut off it. And when he'd give you a whack with that, you'd nearly jump through the roof. And my sister used to get it whack with it too when she played up as well.
And what would be considered sort of a thing that you would deserve that? Can you remember when you got it once?
Well, Dad would never get the razor strap out unless we repeatedly kept doing the wrong thing all the time. If there was any way he could possibly reason you out of it, he would do so. So the razor strap was only the very, very last resort. And that would be like if you kept going into his bedroom and mucking everything up in his bedroom, or destroying things in the kitchen and all that type of thing, and repeatedly kept doing it all the time. Then he would revert to the strap.
Was your father a warm man?
No, he was a very, very calm man.
But was he affectionate?
Yes, he was.
And what about your mother? How would you describe her as a person?
Well, she was the wildest one of the two, and never had as much affection as my dad.
Why do you think that was with your mum?
Well, my dad was reared in the country. He was born in Bega, and my mother was born in Rockdale. And I think the people that came from the country were quite a more relaxed type of people than the ones that came from the city.
Yeah, your dad was pretty enterprising. Like, he had the cabs, and he had the pickup truck, and then he had the chook farm.
Yes,
so he was pretty...
He was extremely active, and he was always working at something, always trying to keep things going.
Do you think what impact did the Depression have on him? I mean, was he doing all those different things and trying to scratch a living, just doing whatever he could get the idea to do because of the Depression? Or was he always like that? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, he actually, when he went to school in Bega, and he only went to about 6th class, and then he was the very first person ever in Bega to get a motorbike. And this was back in the days when the very first motorbikes came out. And he bought himself a Rudge Multi. It had 28 forward gears. And it was just a matter of sort of going down another notch all the way, you know. And it had a belt drive. It had a belt drive on it on the back, and then whenever he drove it through a creek the water would get on the belt and the belt would slip, and he'd have to get off and push it to get it through the creek. But his very first job with that, when he left school, and with this motorbike, was working as a traveller for Griffith Tea from Wentworth Avenue. Mm-hmm. That's up here in Wentworth Avenue in Sydney, down near Central Railway, and there's the big Griffith Tea building is still there. And he had a job as a traveller for Griffith Tea, and he used to travel all over New South Wales on this motorbike, going out all the outback towns and places getting orders for tea. And that was his very first job, and up until he died, he always reckoned that was the best job he had in his whole life.
Yeah.
He really enjoyed that job. He liked it. It was great. All he had to supply was a pencil and a piece of paper, and he used to get all these orders for the tea and then take them back to the company, and the company would pay him for getting the orders, and they'd handle all the shipping of it, getting it away and so forth, and he'd go off getting more orders.
Well, how did the Depression affect him? How old was he when you were born, do you think?
Oh, he was a fair bit older than me. He was born in 1897.
So he was in his 30s when you were born?
Yeah.
35, mid-30s.
Yeah, and my mother was 22 years younger. Because my dad had been married twice, you see, like my brother, my half-brother, he was married to her first.
When she was 22, when he was 33?
No, she was 22. She was 22 years younger than my dad.
Oh, okay.
Was it? That
No,
right?
no, I hope not.
Well, well, it might have been she was 22, but I always thought she was 20-odd years younger than Dad was.
But
Yeah.
quite a big gap.
Yeah.
But, well, having a child in 1933 wouldn't have been the brightest idea with the work, that would have been the worst year of the Depression. And did you ever hear anything about how they managed to survive and how it affected
Well,
them?
Dad had the... well, when the Depression started, before I was born, and this was back in 1928 or something or other, when things started getting bad, they'd started... Dad had the house in Queanbeyan, and he had the two taxis at the Queanbeyan railway station. And he built a big house opposite the railway station, and as people got off the railway train, they'd get into his estate cars, and he'd take them around where Canberra is and show them where the old Parliament House is going to be built, which is, that's the old one now. It was just pegs in the ground then, and he'd take tourists around and show them around where all Canberra's going to be and whatnot. Well, then the Depression came, I suppose, back from 28 to 30, it got real bad, and there was no work there at all, and he packed up and came to Sydney. That's why he came to Sydney. And his first wife had left him and taken the little boy with her. And so he came to Sydney and bought this... he met my mother at a dance, I believe, in Sydney here somewhere, and then they found this little house in Paddington and married and bought this little house in Paddington. They married in the Presbyterian Church in Oxford Street, right in the middle of Paddington Shopping Centre. I think that now it's closed down. But,
What can you remember? Oh, sorry.
well, then he tried very hard on making a go with the taxi all through those Depression years, and it couldn't earn very much at all. So my mother started taking in boarders, so this place became possibly like a little boarding house as well. And so between the boarders and the taxi, he sort of survived through the Depression until the war started. And then when the war started and they started building the Cronulla railway line, that's when Dad started to branch out onto these other things. Yeah.
What can you remember of the war years? You would have been...
I remember seeing lots of soldiers marching up and down.
Yeah, where?
Yeah. And one of the things that the soldiers had to do in those days was a 20-year march before they sent them away overseas. And and they used to march out past Engadine, Heathcote there, and you'd see them all lined up marching on the 20-mile march. And then when the Japanese came into Sydney Harbour and they sank the little Japanese submarines, I remember my dad taking me down when they were actually pulling the submarines up, the very first time they were bringing the submarines up and putting them on display for everybody to have a look at.
Were there Japanese in them? Dead Japanese in them?
Well, I think they'd already taken the bodies out, I believe, or whatever, yes. But
Can you remember the outbreak of the war?
Vaguely, in 39.
Yeah.
Only 6 years old.
Yeah. Well, what about when the Japanese got involved? That would have been 41, I think. I mean, that would have been in 41.
Yeah.
Was it 41? The end, yeah. Can you remember that? Once it looked like Australia was being threatened by Japan?
Yes, I can. I don't remember the exact day when the Japanese came, when we got involved with the Japanese, but I can remember very clearly the things that went on at the times, and Australia's participation in it were some of our neighbours' sons that had been killed, and the reaction of the families when they'd got their news that their sons were dead.
How did they get that news?
A telegram.
Mm. Yeah. Were people living in dread?
Sometimes someone coming out and delivering it personally.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the telegram boy wouldn't be somebody you wanted to see in those days.
No, not always. Not always. The mothers were always concerned about that, and they'd always be talking to each other about it and so forth. Mm-hmm. It gradually got worse and worse. Then, as it built up to the time when they raided us in Sydney Harbour, and then the raids in Darwin and so forth, and all the talk and everything that used to go on about it. And my cousins, I had quite a lot of cousins that were involved in the war, and I suppose, and uncles, cousins and uncles, and half of them were killed.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of them didn't come back.
And what was the feeling amongst people? Were people afraid? Did they think that we would be invaded?
Very much so. But when after my dad took me down to see the Japanese submarines brought out of the water, before they actually brought the submarines out, after the raid, the mother submarine had fired some shells onto the coast in Sydney and blew up some houses up near Dover Heights somewhere out near there, and everybody packed up and wanted to go and live in Katoomba. And I can remember my dad taking me around some of these houses, saying that he could buy them for the amount of money that's owing on them. People just didn't want them anymore, and they'd let you take over if you'd take over the mortgage that was on it, you could have it.
Did many people do that?
Well, I believe quite a few did. I think a lot of Jewish people did.
Yeah. Made a killing.
Yeah. Oh, well, it was there for anybody that wanted it. Yeah.
Yeah. When you were a kid, say by the time you got to be about 10 years old, were you expected to contribute to the family in any way?
Yes, I started work when I was about 13 years of age. One of the shops that my mother used to, she had a hairdressing shop, and then next door to the shops my dad built, she opened a cake shop, and used to make bread and cakes and so forth. And I used to have to deliver all this bread and cakes all the time. And I used to have do so much on Saturday was the main day. I used to have to do so much before school, so much after school, and eventually I left school. I started work full time when I was about 14 years of age.
Gosh.
Yeah. But then
Did you want to leave school, or was that sort of you had to?
Well, the environment wasn't too good, and at the time, and I thought it was better to get out and earn some money and see if I could get out of the things weren't so good at home.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why did your parents split, do you think? Was it your mother's feminist streak, or...?
Yeah, I think mainly, yeah. She always disagreed with everything that my dad was doing, and she finally didn't like him anymore.
Mm. Yeah, it must seem pretty sad.
Yeah.
Go through. What did your family do for fun? What would you have family outings?
Well, yes, we used to go. I got some photos of some picnics that we went into with Dad when he had his old taxis. But we used to go out on picnics and meet relatives, go up to Centennial Park up here, and that was always a big thing, going up to Centennial Park. We'd go over the zoo, across the harbour and on the ferry, you know, that was always a big thing. And the Royal Easter Show was always a marvellous thing. You know, whenever we all used to look forward to the Royal Easter Show every year, and we were always disappointed. We were disappointed when they stopped giving out sample bags during the war years. You know, there was no more in sample bags, but before the war and after the war, they always had these sample bags we used to like. And at first they used to give them away. You know, they never used to charge you for the sample bags. Now they cost you a lot of money to get those sample bags.
Yeah, they do. What about in the evening? I mean, now everybody watches television. What would happen in your family typically in the evening? I mean...
Oh, well, we'd have the radio, and we had a record player. And Dad always had his favourite records. That were Richard Talbot and those type of things, you know, that he used to like listening to, and some waltzes. And my mum had her favourite records, which were more modern, which I can't quite remember what they all were, but so therefore occasionally we'd have a record time, putting on records, listen to the music. As children, we didn't like those very much.
The kids wouldn't like the record...
No, Richard Talbot and those great tenors and all, we weren't keen on those. We used to wait, and we were keen on getting the radio on and listening to Mrs. Obbs and Dad and Dave and those type of shows, you know.
Well, what were the popular shows then? Who was
Mrs. Obbs was a great one.
Yeah,
Mrs. Obbs. Well, later when I got a bit older, I had a cousin who used to work with Jack Davy in the Jack Davies show.
What was his name?
He was Don Slater, and he used to live with us, and we always used to like listening to Jack Davy then, and then he had that picker box and all those type of things, and there were all those things on radio at first, and then later. This was before television. They were good.
Let me think. Can you describe your mother's working day? Did she work hard?
Yes, with the businesses that she was working very hard all the time. Yeah.
Did you get help with the domestic work at home?
No, she used to just do whatever she wanted to do herself and leave it at that.
Oh,
Yeah.
So she wasn't that fussed about having the perfect house?
No, she never thought there was quite enough money available to be able to afford a domestic help.
Right, yeah. But from the sound of things, your family had was it a gramophone, or was it you know when you talk about the record player, was that one of those wind-up ones?
Yeah, gramophone. It was a big one, a high one.
Oh, really?
A big one with a big lid at the top. Then you'd open two little doors up where the sound would come out and so forth. And that was a real special treat in those days. On the first radio we had, I remember, the first radio we had on the farm, the poultry farm, it went off a battery, like a car battery. It didn't work off the electricity because I think that's right, but we didn't have electricity to start with. You just had kerosene lamps. And of course the wireless went off a battery. And you had to have this special, you had to get the batteries charged all the time to keep the radio going, and often the battery would be flat, and you'd have a few days without any radio, and that would be terrible. But you'd survive. Another thing we used to do when we were kids, because the place at the back of the poultry farm was lots of bush that was all virgin, and lots of wildflowers and things. So we'd go down and pick nice big bunches of wildflowers, and we'd go up and stand on the side of the road holding a bunch of flowers, selling them to the traffic that went past. And often people would pull up and buy these bunch of wildflowers off you.
Oh, dear.
That used to raise a bit of pocket money too.
Yeah. What would be a typical, looking back, say, you know, when you were in Paddington and what have you, before you got the poultry farm, what would be a typical meal? I mean, would you have your main meal in the evening? Would you have it at night or in the middle of the day?
No, the main meal was in the evening.
And what would that be?
Well, I can remember Mum would go down to the markets, the Paddy's markets in the central there, and she used to shop in there most of the time because you could get a lot more for the same amount of money. And she'd get a ride in with Dad in the taxi going in the morning, and she'd have to get the bus and the tram. That's right, the tram in those days, they had trams. She'd get the tram out part of the way along Oxford Street after she'd done the shopping at the markets, and she'd buy lots of vegetables and stuff, and she'd put on stews and roasts. You know, we'd have roast chicken and rice puddings. You know, she'd make rice puddings like creamed rice with and bread and butter custards and things like that, and that was quite nice. I never ever liked spinach when I was a little fellow, and I don't think any of us liked very many green vegetables. We used to have to be forced into eating our green vegetables because we never used to like them. And not until my children were little that I realised that the same thing happened with them. It wasn't just because of the Depression days. They didn't like their green vegetables either. So,
were your family well off in comparison to other families?
Yeah, well, we were better off than the average because of Dad, but not possibly because my mother was always doing something and my father was always doing something. If my mother had just stayed at home and just looked after us children and done nothing else, we wouldn't have been better off than the average.
And when your mum was out, like when you come home from school and what have you, was there anybody there to look after you, or was anybody around?
No, my mother would always, she'd be working, and we'd come home and we'd usually let our mother know that we were back, and then we'd go playing around the yard or go off down the bush somewhere.
Oh, that's at Heathcote?
Yeah.
What about when you were in Paddington? Did your mum work?
Here, well, no, we'd just play her in the small yard. We'd had cat and I can remember the cat had kittens a couple of times. We used to play with the kittens, and I remember one Christmas I got a little carpenter set. That's right, and there was a little miniature saw in the carpenter set. So there was no one around, so I thought I'd practice sawing on the dining room table leg. And got into terrible trouble over nearly sawing that leg off the dining room table. That was a strap deal, that was.
Yeah. Did your mum work when you were living in Paddington?
No, she had a few boarders.
Oh, that's right,
in the place, yeah.
Were there a lot of kids in the neighbourhood in Paddington?
Well, yes, there were quite a lot of children. it wasn't as prestige a suburb as it is today in those days. As a matter of fact, it was considered a little less than prestige, a little less than average, I think, in those days. But there were quite a few children around, and there were gangs. You know, kids used to have little gangs. They'd go off, and if you're a member of this gang, you didn't like that other gang and all this type of thing. And if you met each other, you'd throw rocks at each other and that type of thing. Yeah.
Did they have names, the gangs?
Yeah, we used to have. I just can't remember what they are now, but we used to have nicknames. Yeah.
Well, who were your friends?
I'm having trouble trying to remember who all my friends were now, but I remember I had some. I had more older friends than I had younger ones, and I had a doctor's son that I used to get along very well with. I've forgotten what his name is now, though, and we had roller skates. We used to do some roller skating up and down the street too, and footpaths and things like that. We learned to roller skate when we were little.
Was there much traffic then?
A little bit, but not a lot. Not like it is today.
Were there still horse-drawn vehicles?
There were still horse-drawn vehicles around in those days. Yeah.
What sort of, so you used to roller skate with your friends? What other sorts of things would you do with your mates?
Well, we'd go off looking around the streets, see if there's anything we could get hold of. Empire Day was a great day. I can never forget Empire Day. And one of the big things we used to do for Empire Day is see how many letterboxes we could blow up. We used to go around putting big bungers in people's letterboxes and see if we could blow their letterboxes up. That seemed to be a great deal for Empire Day. And nothing. I just can't sort of place too much more at the moment. Yeah.
Well, how far did you roam? Like, this is when you were in Paddington, and so you would have been 8 or so before you left here, I assume, 8 or 9. How much freedom did you have? You know, how far could you go from home?
Well, when I was younger, when I was around about 5 or 6 or something or other, I jumped on a tram. I can remember this very clearly. I jumped on a tram going along Oxford Street. Didn't pay for a fare, just got on. Got off in the city and couldn't remember what tram to get to come back. And so I was completely lost, and I remember going into a fire station, and I was very, very upset. And the fireman sat me up on top of the fire engine and showed me how a fire engine worked and whatnot, and they finally got in touch with the police, and the police came and picked me up and took me home.
Oh, gee.
Yeah.
What was the reception like at home?
Well, it was I got into a bit of trouble over that. But when I was little, that was about as far as I went. That was from Paddington into the fire station into the city.
But when you were playing with your friends, would you always play in other kids' or your own backyards, or would you play in the streets?
Well, we'd go into other friends' backyards in around Paddington. A lot of the houses in around Paddington, you'd in and out. You'd go in. Well, you know, some of the people's places you go into, you wouldn't know them very well, but you'd be friends to their children, and you just run through the place like it was your own, and you'd get chased out too, just the same way. Yeah.
Were there parks in the area that your kids would go and play? Like, was it a safe area for kids to wander around in?
Well, the Centennial Park was the main park. There wasn't a lot of parks, as you know, around Paddington, and
Did you ever go over there with your friends?
Yes, we'd go over to Centennial Park quite often. Yeah, that was another place we used to go to.
Was it safe to be there just...
Well, at night time wasn't safe, but it was all right during the day.
Yeah. Well, when you were with your friends, how did you spend your time? What sort of games did kids play then?
Oh, well, we'd play cricket. rounders. Rounders was a great game because all you need was a stick and a tennis ball, and it was like it was nearly like a baseball type of a game. We used to call it rounders, and then we'd have a football, and we'd try to play football. We'd always be trying to play different types of football, but always have an argument over the rules and everything. And
was this in the streets sort of thing?
yeah, anywhere in the parks and streets and around the backyards and things like that. Yeah.
Did you have any toys or books?
Yes, not many books. Never had very many books at all. Books weren't very plentiful in those days. I had a few toys. Eventually I got one of those little cars, one of those little pedal cars, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I used to get into trouble for riding it out in the road in amongst all the traffic. Gee, when I think of it today, you wouldn't get far pedaling one of those little things out there today. But in those days, you actually did pedal them out in the street, and if there's any traffic coming around, they'd just go around you.
Oh. Aside from your trip down to the fire station, can you remember any adventures you had just in the local neighbourhood?
Oh, apart from blowing up letterboxes, that was quite an adventure. Yeah. Remember climbing up a tree once. We used to, some of the gangs the kids were with, used to think it was quite an achievement to who could climb the highest tree, or who could get the highest, you know. And I can remember climbing right up the top of one of those big pine trees once, and before I could get right down, the branch broke and I fell down and got knocked unconscious. And all the other kids thought I'd died. And they all run in and told my mother that I was dead. I remember that very clearly. But,
well, where was the pine tree?
I think it was down near the park there, the Centennial Park. Yeah.
And did you have to go to hospital?
No, I came to after a little while and just had a great big lump on my head. It didn't have any stitches even. So.
Can you people do like their everyday shopping? I mean, you know, the food and grocery sort of things. Did people do that once a week or once a month, or was it a daily kind of thing?
Oh no, it was once a week, and the grocer used to come around and take the order. That was a thing that's sort of gone out today. You'd pick the grocer that you wanted to buy your groceries from, and he would come around to your house and he'd sit down in the kitchen with you and go through all the things that you wanted to order, and he'd write them all down. And through the week, you'd have a big list thing hanging up near the refrigerator or something, and all the things you're running out of, you'd mark off, so that when the grocer came, you'd give him all the order. And a refrigerator was quite a luxury. I can remember we had a meat safe. I remember before we had a refrigerator, we didn't even have a refrigerator. We had a drip safe with a tray on the top with water in it and cords hanging over the side, and the water used to drip down the hessian down the side, and it was on the veranda and the wind used to blow through it. And it'd keep everything cool, keep the butter cool and the milk and the meat and all that. And the butcher used to come around. He'd come around 2 or 3 times a week if you want him to. The baker would come round every day. The grocer would come round once a week.
We were talking about deliveries, and you're talking about the butcher, and who else did you say? The baker?
Yeah, well, the baker used to come every day. The iceman used to come around about twice a week. The grocer would come round once a week. And did I say the butcher? Did I miss that? The butcher used to come round too, and he'd deliver the meat. And we never had a refrigerator to start with, and so therefore we had these drip safes with the water thing and the water dripping down, and the ice chest, and the nice old wooden ice chest that the iceman used to put a block of ice in a couple of times a week.
Mm. Do you have other people delivering things like the rabbito or?
Yes, the rabbito used to come around with a horse and cart, and he used to yell out rabbito, and he'd come down the street, and a lot of people used to buy rabbits in those days, and it tasted just like chicken. It wasn't too bad. I've eaten a lot of rabbit, but...
But any other people would come around like that delivering things? Can you remember? And look, with those other deliveries, with say the grocer, would you get fruit and veg delivered too? Green groceries?
Yes, there was a fruit and vegetable man used to come down the street with a cart, and he'd yell out, and people would come out and buy stuff right off his cart.
And were they horse-drawn vehicles or motor vehicles?
Both. Sometimes horse-drawn, sometimes motor-driven. Yeah.
Was there still a lot of horse-drawn vehicles around there just up until the war?
Oh yeah, all the bread and milk carts were still horse-drawn, all of them, and some of the big brewery wagons like beer wagons were still horse-drawn with the great big Clydesdales because they looked very good. They're very impressive, but the motor vehicles were coming in, but petrol got very hard to get. And so in a lot of instances, the horses were kept on until they could find better access to fuel.
After the war?
Yeah.
You know, with having all the horses around, wasn't that a bit of a health hazard? Because something would have had to happen with their droppings. I mean, how did they deal with that?
Didn't seem to make any difference, and if a lot of people used to go out looking for it for putting their gardens, and but it didn't seem to make any difference. I can remember them going up and down Pitt Street and George Street down in Sydney, and horse-drawn vehicles all over the place, and nobody used to pick it up down there. It used to just stay there and just run over it, and eventually it'd rain and wash it all away.
Yeah. Were there a lot of flies around then? Do you think?
There were more flies then than there is today. But I think when you move out of the city, the flies are just as bad as they ever were then. But I don't know why the flies are not so bad in the city now. I think it's because the air pollution's that bad the flies can't live in it.
Right. Okay. Well, look, talking about air pollution, do you think it's worse today than it was then?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the air today is nowhere near as nice to breathe as it used to be in those days.
But wouldn't everybody have had a lot of coal and wood fires and stuff at that time?
Yes, but there was nowhere near as many people lived in Sydney, and they were different type of fumes than all the exhaust fumes from vehicles and so forth today. And you used to be able to smell the fires occasionally. At night time you could sniff the air and you could smell the coal fires or wood fires burning and so forth. Today you just sniff the air and all you smell is exhaust fumes. Yeah.
Well, from what you can remember at Paddington, I know you were very young, but was there a particular social focus of the area there? Like, was there a particular pub the men would go to, or a place where the women would meet? Can you remember?
Not that I know. No, I never ever got involved in any of that.
Or a corner shop where they'd gossip or get together? Do you know what I'm saying?
No, well, there were pubs, but I can remember my uncles and auntie and cousins that had been in the First World War and that were in the Second World War. They were coming and going all the time, and of course they were going out to different places and pubs and things, but I wasn't old enough to get involved in all that. Yeah.
Okay. Was it a safe neighbourhood?
Yeah. Yes, it was quite safe. You had to be reasonably careful. You didn't sort of take things too casual, but there was no real worry about things. I can remember once in Paddington walking out of the front door. My mother had been bathing me, washing me, and I walked out of the front door, and I think I walked down Oxford Street to Jersey Road where the police station is, and as I was going past the police station without any clothes on, the policeman grabbed hold of me and and eventually took me back home. I had no clothes on.
Yeah. How old were you?
Oh, that was before I started school. Yeah.
Oh, that's a nice story. I'm sorry. What were the main businesses in the area? Can you remember?
Oh, I can remember there used to be a number of farriers around for shoeing horses and things, which you don't see today. There were lots of these grocery shops and big, nice grocery shops that you used to see that you could go in and buy all these groceries and all that you don't see today. You got supermarkets today. There weren't any supermarkets in those days.
You mean like self-serve?
Yeah, there was none of those. No. And bakeries. You used to see a lot of bakeries in those days. Every suburb had its own bakery.
Are you talking about, when you're talking about the grocery stores and what have you, would they have been on Oxford Street?
Oh yes, there were all sorts of stores along Oxford Street. Yeah, like it is today. There was all sorts of stores along there, and it's always been a fairly active street, Oxford Street.
Mm. Can you remember if there were any factories in the area?
There were little factories around Paddington. Yeah, everywhere here and there was a little factory here and there.
Do you know what they were making?
No, I don't. Okay. No, the mainly light industry, not very heavy industry.
Mm. Can you remember any smells associated with the area? You mentioned the wood smoke from the fires.
Yeah, no, not in Paddington. They weren't too bad, except the ones I mentioned. But I used to always dread going out to Alexandria with my dad when we'd go out to Alexandria or out to the airport. Because to get to the airport, you had to go through Alexandria, and when you were going through Alexandria, the smell was unbearable because of the tanneries that were out there, that were tanning the hides, and it was dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And it's great now that you can get to the airport and you don't have to go through all those smells.
Gee, the people in Alexandria don't admit that.
Yeah.
It's the first I've heard it mentioned. Okay, well, what sights or what sounds do you associate with your childhood? I mean, you grew up across the road from the barracks, the Lance. Is it?
Well, we used to hear the soldiers' reveilles and calls and things like that quite all the time, and you'd see the soldiers marching all the time, marching around.
It must have got pretty active over there at the barracks once the war was declared.
It was, and of course, just down the road from us was the showground too. Just down the road a little bit was the showground, and we used to often go over into the showground. As I said before, getting into the show we considered as one of the great highlights. Yeah, we used to love that.
During the war, didn't they make the showground some sort of...
yeah, it was closed down for a while.
They used it for military purposes or something,
Yeah.
didn't they?
Yeah.
You don't, okay. What sights, when you close your eyes and you think back to that time, what vision or sights come to your mind of the area? It's a hard question.
I'm sorry, what was that, Sue?
What sights come to your mind when you think back? What images? Are there any special images you associate with Paddington towards the end of the 30s?
Well, the one that you can never forget is all those trams racing up and down Oxford Street. It doesn't seem the same place now without those trams all running through there.
Mm. When you say racing, do you mean that they were really going really fast?
They'd get along Oxford Street fairly fast. And there are lots of parts in Oxford Street where they separated the trams from the traffic, and they could really pick up some speed going along there.
Were there many accidents involving people and trams and cars and trams?
No, because everybody was wary of a Bondi tram. They'd keep right away from it. They know they were travelling faster than the other trams.
Can you remember any local criminals in Paddington?
No, I never got I never got old enough to get involved in anything like any of those.
Can you remember if there was, what the crime rate was like there at all? Can you remember your parents being security conscious, or perhaps doing things like, you know how people used to be able to put in foreign orders, if people were working in big government or whatever industries, they could, you know, in workshops and that, they could get people to make things for them, you know, foreign orders. Have you heard that expression?
Yes, I have, but I don't remember getting involved in any of it. I can remember my dad buying things on black market if he could. He'd buy the black market petrol coupons if he could get them. He'd buy cigarettes on black market if he could get them, especially if he can get an American serviceman in the taxi. He'd buy some extra cigarettes off him. But as far as criminals, I don't remember any at all. And my dad's first taxis were canvas top ones. They didn't have a steel top, they had a canvas top, and they had 3 lots of seats, you know, the driver's seat in the front, and then 2 lots of seats for the passengers at the back. They were big, long Studebakers. And nobody ever used to steal them or damage them or anything like that. And he'd leave them locked up down at Central Railway all night, or leave them out in the street at Paddington. Nobody used to worry them.
Well, what about things that people didn't think were really criminal, like SP booking and the sly grog, because, you know, because the laws...
Well, I know there was SP bookies all over the place, and there was sly grog going all over the place, but grog was very hard to get, I believe, because I remember my cousins and uncles always complaining that they weren't getting enough, and it was rationed, I think. I think there was a certain amount of rationing on it.
And that would have been the very early years of the war.
Yeah, and for some time after the war too. Yeah.
Gee. What about prostitution?
Well, there was a lot of prostitution on during the war. Mainly, I think the main areas that I can remember is around the Woolloomooloo area. It was very, very bad. Well, there's a real lot there, but there was a lot round Double Bay, and you used to see all the soldiers standing in a row out in the street. And when you see the soldiers standing in a row, you knew just well what was going on. But we used to sling off as kids. We used to make remarks, but we never got involved in it. Sometimes a soldier might ask if you'd like to join in the row, but you'd run as fast as you could.
Yeah, it seems funny them lining up in the street.
Yeah.
Were there anything like two-up schools or things more like gambling casinos?
Well, up at King's Cross there was, and around Darlinghurst there were gambling places. I think one I used to remember was Tomo's or something, but there were places, but I never got involved in them. I never went to them. I wasn't old enough to get involved with them.
No, I was just wondering if you heard about them, because one would hope at 8.
Had heard about them. Yeah, they've been going for a long time, and the two-up was more active in the war years than it is now, because the soldiers used to really like playing two-up and things.
Was there employment available for kids?
Well, when I was 13, I was doing a man's work, and I was told that if I could do the same work as a man, they'd pay me the same salary as a man.
And what were you doing?
I was delivering bread. I started delivering bread on a bread cart.
Was that out at Heathcote?
No, it was around Sutherland.
Yes.
Yeah, and Carringbar.
Yeah.
I went right out from Sutherland right out to Carringbar and back again along Port Hacking Road. And I had down Port Hacking Road, I had about 340 houses I used to deliver bread to.
did you have what with? A bike?
A horse and cart.
Oh, horse and cart.
Yeah, and yeah. Later on, when I got a little more experienced, I'd run out. You'd leave the bakery early in the morning with a full load of bread, and around about lunchtime or just before lunch, you'd be run out of bread, and it'd be too far to go back to the bakehouse and get another one. So they'd have a truck, a motor truck that would come out with another load of bread for you, and then you'd meet him at a place, and you'd take the bread out of that motor truck and put it into the horse and cart. Then you'd finish your deliveries, and then when you emptied that load, you'd head back. And sometimes, most days, you'd start 5 o'clock in the morning, and some days I'd be finished at 2:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you'd have to attend to the horses and put them away. And you'd get paid a man's wage, and as a matter of fact, by the time I was 17, I was getting paid equal to 1.5 times a man's wage, because I was doing extra work, and if you did extra work, they'd pay you extra money.
Yeah, you must have worked hard.
Well, it wasn't too bad, and it wasn't much of an incentive to keep you in school when you could, when everybody wanted you to do this work, and it was it sort of didn't seem to make sense to stay in school. You felt like you ought to be out there working, because there was such a shortage of labour. All the young men had been sent to the war, and a lot of them didn't come back.
What about, what about jobs like paper boys and selling bottles and any of that? Was it, when you were a kid in Paddington, was there anything, did kids do that kind of thing?
Lots of fellows had paper runs and boot cleaning deals and cleaning shoes and things like that, but I never got involved in any of those things.
You weren't expected to with the family?
No.
What were the most popular newspapers when you were growing up?
Oh, I think it probably would have been the Herald and Telegraph. I just might have been the Mirror and the Truth. Truth used to be pretty big in the early days too. It was.
They used to have scandalous stories.
Yeah, a lot of. It was a pretty popular one because it had a lot of scandalous stories in it all the time. Yeah.
What about magazines? What were there magazines?
Well, Woman's Weekly was the most important one. I remember my mother had to have a Woman's Weekly every week. That was a must. And
did people read magazines like House and Garden and those sort of ones about decorating?
No. There weren't many magazines available. Like the Woman's Weekly was regarded quite a privilege to get the Woman's Weekly each week, and I remember some families didn't even get it. Yeah.
What about comics? Did you read comics?
Oh yeah, and we used to keep them too. We used to collect them. Comics were quite a thing to get, and when we got a comic, you wouldn't just read it once like a lot of the kids do today. You'd read the damn thing about 20 times before you decided you'd swap it with someone else for another one.
And what were the favourite ones? What were the titles that you liked?
Oh, I don't remember them all now, but there was like Speed Gordon and all the Walt Disney Mickey Mouses and things like that, I think, and I just don't remember them all, but there's something like that type of thing.
They had ones like Phantom around then?
Yeah, the Phantom. Yeah, that was another one. Yeah, the Phantom.
Did you go on holidays when you were a kid? When we're talking, say, around the war, the end of the Depression?
Yes, we used to. I used to go on holidays mainly with my father, because my mother would be involved with her other affairs, and so I used to spend most of my holidays with my father, and my sister used to spend whatever holidays she had with my mother. And my father used to take me to Queensland a lot, and he was one of the first people ever in Queensland to build a block of flats at Surfers Paradise. And I'll never forget it when he bought the land and built the flats in Surfers Paradise. It was in Palm Avenue, Surfers Paradise, and the only thing there was a hotel and a zoo and a caravan park and lots of sand. And there was a fellow from Bondi had moved up there who became Sir Bruce Small. And he had a Melbourne Star bike shop down at Bondi, and he moved up to Surfers, and that was when my dad moved there. He moved up there and started building some flats up there.
Started it all off.
Yeah, and we used to go there often then, and then we'd stay in Brisbane, different places in Brisbane, and then we'd go up to the Hotel Meadowlow Bath at Katoomba. That used to be quite a deal. We'd go up there and then we'd go down Jenolan Caves and stay down at Jenolan Caves. That was quite a deal.
Caves House. Did you stay at Caves House?
Yes, and it used to belong to the government. I think now Peppers have it or something, but it used to belong to the government. It was run by the government. And then we had relatives down in Bega. That's where all my relatives came from. And I can remember being going down there and staying with my relatives on their dairy farms, and I had another relative out at Canterbury, and I went to school at Canterbury for a while. That was right. Went out there, and I was left there for about 2 months or something, and went to the Canterbury school for a couple of months. And they had these, and I remember they had better air raid shelters than we had in here, because they'd lined their air raid shelters, or you'd go, and every day you had to go air raid shelter practice. You know, you'd have to march out from the school, and then you'd go down into the air raid shelter and all get into your position where you had to go, and the teachers would all supervise it and look after it, and then the teachers would march you all out again, and you'd go back into your classrooms. And that was a everyday deal, was the air raid shelter practice.
Was that in Paddington as well?
No, we never had an air. I must have left Paddington before the air raid shelters were built there. But we had air raid shelters in Sutherland and Heathcote. Yeah, but they weren't anywhere near as good as Canterbury. That was the best one. They were really nice.
Yeah. Well, how aware were you of the world outside your local area when you were growing up?
Well, quite a lot. As I've just explained, you know, we used to travel to Queensland and up into the mountains and down the south coast with my father.
Can you remember the common illnesses at the time?
Beg pardon?
Common illnesses. What did people get sick from at that time?
Oh, they used to get the flu just like they do today, but then at school the children used to get a lot more than they do today, because, or they used to be more serious, I think. Whooping cough and diphtheria and all those type of things were worse in those days than they are now.
Can you remember any deaths?
Vaguely, I just can't place who they were, but I can vaguely remember one or two that disappeared, died from being sick, yeah.
Just, you don't know what it was?
I didn't know them personally, no.
Or what they had?
Oh, it was one of those, something like the illnesses that were bad at the time going round, you know.
What about the polio? Was it
well, I can remember polio a bit. I remember a couple of people were going to school with that got polio, that were stricken with polio, and they weren't able to treat it very good in the early days, and they were sort of fairly crippled up. And it wasn't till later years, when I wasn't in school anymore and all, that they really got some sort of control over the polio virus. And now I'm involved in Rotary, And by year 2000, Rotary's eradicated polio from the whole world.
Can you remember any songs or jokes or riddles that were popular?
Oh, not offhand.
What about pictures? What were your favourite movies? Did you go to the pictures?
Yeah, I remember, you know, some of our favourite ones was Tarzan, the Green Hornet, and the funny ones like the Marx Brothers and things like that. And then there was Laurel and Hardy, and all those were science fiction and the comedy ones were very, very popular, and the westerns. Oh, and the westerns were great. Yeah, Gene Autry and his horse Flicker. Yeah.
And what were the sci-fi ones that you remember?
The which?
Science fiction. What?
Oh, that was like the Green Hornet and Speed Gordon and all those type of ones. That it's surprising how things have turned out very close to what they were talking about in those days.
Yeah. What can you remember of rituals? You know, things like when you had to, you know, they raise the flag and sing the national anthem, or where you would do.
At school, every morning we had to raise the flag. Yeah, that was one of the important things that we had to do at school. But when I had this one teacher running the school, he insisted we all attend the raising of the flag.
And would you say anything?
Oh, we had to sing "God Save the King and the Queen" in the school. Also, before we could sit down, we weren't even allowed to sit down at our desk until we did that.
And were you ever involved in anything like what was called, I think at the time, physical culture, and they get lots of kids doing this sort of coordinated movement stuff, a bit like synchronised swimming only on land? Sorry.
No, we never, like aerobics or something.
Sort of, but I think it was slower and more gentle.
Oh, like that Chinese chew thing. No, I don't remember them giving us any of that.
What about maypole dancing? And was there ever any of that you remember?
No. When we were in kindergarten, they used to have all sorts of funny things going, which I can't remember them all now. And there were probably like deals like with maypole and probably dancing things that I don't remember a lot about.
So you can't remember sort of any sort of ritualistic sort of things. Well, in a way, like Cracker Night, the celebration of Cracker Night's a bit of a ritual. It's something that everyone used to do until recently, on Empire Day or the Queen's birthday or whatever.
Yeah.
Can you remember any other occasions? Well, say maybe even Anzac Day, the Anzac Day March. Can you remember anything else, like Wattle Day or Arbor Day, or the celebrating of any other day? Or how things like that were celebrated? What about Australia Day? Did they celebrate that?
Well, I don't think we had it.
Yeah.
I don't remember very much of those things. It was very British orientated. And in the school and everything, they more or less run it as if you're in England. And that's the way I remember it.
Were you taught at school that you were part of the British Empire?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, and we were all very proud of it. I mean, they made you proud of it, you know. And we always grew up thinking we were part of England. Yeah.
Oh, what did you think of the Japanese? What did they teach you at school about the Japanese and the Germans?
Well, they were the bad guys, you know. Yeah, they were the bad guys, and they never used to. Because perhaps there weren't very many good things to talk about, but there weren't any good things talked about those people at all. And you grew up thinking that they were all going to be an awful lot of people, and it was quite a shock afterwards when you found out they weren't so bad.
Yeah. I forgotten my question.
I can remember the Italians being, and a lot of other prisoners being out at Liverpool. I'd go out there with my father in the taxi sometimes. I mean, and you'd see these great big double fenced prisons out at Liverpool where they'd be keeping all the prisoners out there.
During the war, can you remember any sense of fear about the possibility of Australia being invaded and bombed?
Not ourselves, because we didn't have enough money to go and do much else apart from what we did. But an awful lot of people in the eastern suburbs decided to get out of the eastern suburbs when the Japanese submarines destroyed a few houses that were there. Fired the cannon onto the eastern suburbs and blew a few houses up. Everybody wanted to live in Katoomba after that. Everybody. Yeah.
Can you remember any of the politicians of the day when you were a kid?
No.
Okay.
I wasn't involved in any of those.
No election campaigns?
No, no.
Oh.
I remember, perhaps, Billy Hughes. You know, when Billy Hughes was in power, that he was Prime Minister and in charge of something during the war. And then after the war, when I went into the country, getting a job, got a job as a jackaroo working on a big sheep station. It belonged to Freddie Hughes, which was Billy Hughes' brother.
Oh, gee.
F.W. Hughes. Yeah.
Gosh, was Billy Hughes Prime Minister around the Second World? I thought it was Chifley or somebody was the one in the Second World.
Well, I think it probably was, but...
Billy still was in at some time.
Well, it might have been before the Second World War. Billy Hughes was in or something, yeah.
Yeah, not good on my Prime Ministers. Can you remember, did you ever go to Luna Park when you were a kid?
Yes, quite a lot of times. Yeah, I used to love it too.
And what sort of a place was it then?
Oh, well, it was a real fun place, and it had all the big dippers and whirly-girlies and things like that around the place, and you never had enough money to get onto everything. You always loved to go there, but always leave disappointed because you run out of money.
I was going to say, well, what were the places in the city around Paddington that were important to you, just as places, or and maybe still are important to you?
Well, the let me see. The showground was considered quite a nice. You felt quite privileged to be near that. The racetrack, that was considered quite a deal. They have Randwick not far away. A lot of people used to go to the races. I don't, and we weren't far from the beach. You know, at Paddington wasn't far from. You could get on a tram, a Bondi tram, and go straight down to the beach. That was quite a deal.
I think I'm just about finished. Is there anything I haven't asked that I should have?
Oh, I don't know, Sue. I think you've just about covered it pretty well. I'm not even sure that I've answered everything all right, but I've done the best I can with it all anyway.
Thanks very much. It's been very good.
Right, Sue.